Just wanted to say hi to Rokas. I hadn't seen you for, oh, months, I guess, or more on YouTube, and you just popped up with the fight commentary dude. Yeah, I enjoyed watching your show. I guess, there's a certain kind of, excuse me, um, what? Like my martial arts journey um, was well, I don't know if it was exactly the same. I didn't go full in for Aikido or anything. Yeah, I did more of the kind of, I guess, practical. Started off with judo, or actually wrestling, then judo, which I kind of wish I had been able to continue, but it was at the Y in New York, and my parents were like, why, do pay all that money when you can do wrestling at the local public school? And that was cool. I mean, good reasoning, but, like a lot of my, uh, people I trained with, it wasn't a very positive environment. School I went to, was like very divided by ethnicity or race, and people were very competitive or antisocial. Yeah, so uh, anyway, so then I went from wrestling in junior high, took a break, did Krav Maga. I think was it. I did boxing briefly, like I don't know, a few lessons, and it was interesting, and the trainer was kind of interesting. I could obviously skilled and all that, but like this guy tried to steal my wallet. It's in Manhattan. It's like I was born outside of New York City, ended up in Chicago in the end. So slightly less worse than New York. But what was I going to say? Um, anyway, boxing, guy tried to steal my wallet. Some lumpin', from the ghetto. And, I caught him trying to steal my wallet, and he's like, "Oh, I was just, bullshit." I was like, "Yeah, right." So I was like, "Okay, that's enough. I don't want to hang around fucking, gutter elements." Um, and then I did a little. I think after that, yeah. Then I did Krav Maga. Did a year in like grad school, labor studies. That was basically a waste. Those people are, liberal filth. But anyway, that's another story. I was up in like Western Massachusetts, and doing Krav Maga for some months, and then went to Chicago. What did I do? I ended up being a laborer loading trucks in Chicago. Off the old Jewtown, Maxwell Street. What do they call that? The Jeff Street. They called it Jefferson Street. I guess, like most of my coworkers were black from like Mississippi originally. So Jeff Street was better than Maxwell Street. Well, obviously a lot of the Negro people would go to Jewtown, as they called it, Maxwell Street, and buy things, sell things, play the blues. A lot of the blues came out of that area. Anyway, so then what did I do after that? Yeah, I think, how did I continue after? It was some years, I'm pretty sure. Like, I didn't do martial arts, until, boy, was it 2000? Maybe it was, yeah, maybe it was 2000, I guess. So 2000, maybe 2000 and, boy, when did I stop doing martial arts? I kind of kept with it on and off. But I was like a hobbyist, and yeah, like one of the injuries I got was this. I went to a McDojo and I did Krav Maga again, and it was run by some Filipino trying to like make as much money as he could, but it was in Skokie, so it was cute, home of the Jews, and nice Jewish karate, except now they're murdering the Palestinians, so Zionism wasn't my thing, and there were some nasty Zionist fascistic one or two actually, and then you had your Jews, Russian Jews, Soviet Jews, and Igor. I was holding a pad for Igor, and He'd been in the Red Army or Soviet Army, whatever it was. He was slamming the pad with his leg, really kicking into it. And then they didn't. The idiot trainers didn't tell me, okay, keep your hands tucked away from the edge of the pad. I was holding the edge of the pad, and then whack. So I lost a ligament and haven't had it repaired since 2010 or whatever. Went to a doctor actually, and Chicago, it's just mafia shit. Half that town should be shot or deported. And that gets to like your injury and the environment. And I rewatched your last video, the healing of your leg, and that was terrible. I actually had, I'll try to show my injury, the scar here. Let's see if I can get it in frame. There we go. Yeah, if you can see that. Basically, soon I'll be next door to you in Belarus. Now I'm in Petrograd, I call it, Petersburg, Leningrad, and 2019 I was in Moscow. I had surviving family from the genocide in 41. We were from a place called, you may have heard of it, Nesvizh. And our people came from Radziwilis, Lithuania, which is another reason, I'm interested in your channel. So I'm, hilariously, since I'm a, dirty communist, I'm actually probably cousins with, I'm sure you know who they are, the Radziwilov, Pani, and, apparently our people, we were the Litvaks, the Jews of Lithuania, originally, I guess. We came down from Radziwilis and walked down to, we called it Nyeshvis, by Yiddish. It has different names depending upon, the language you're speaking. I'm not sure what it would be in Lithuanian, but Nesvilius, I don't know. So anyway, but we founded that town with the Radziwill, Pani. So I'll be over there for Reunification Day, September, around September 17th. And I'll have to pop back to Lithuania, actually. I left my stuff with a friend when I went down to Eastern Europe and former Yugoslavia, where apparently my grandpa came from, Slovenia, or great-grandpa, really, great-grandma. Just found out a year ago. But at any rate, so be great to meet up if you're around. And what else can I say? So basically I did the Krav Maga, Igor, Mr. Red Army, and the idiots, the trainers, helped to snap my tendon. And at that point, I was like, how old was I? 88, I was 20. 98, I was 30. So I was more than 30 years old. And I was like, well, this is all well and good. I like training martial arts, but, there are too many, especially in America, it's just full of douchebags and idiots, and bloodsuckers. So, let me try the Ruski, Sistema. I think I did look at like Kung Fu, I'm like, okay, let me go back to the roots of, martial arts, the ancient China, the Chinese are clever people, as Sheila Costanza would say, and their food is delicious. I went to Kung Fu, and it was like gay liberal, drama club members, like doing, acrobatic, sort of bad acrobatics. And, I went to a couple of their trainings, and I was like, what the drama club fuck is this? So I was like, no, this isn't real. And then I looked at like MMA, and it's just filled with douchebags. Like, I'm gonna hit you. I'm gonna, brag about how, I'm such a stud, and I'm such, And my people, we were the Jewish Taliban. We were Chekists. CIA on the one side, KGB on the other, and personally, a lot of the not so much douchebags, although I don't like the douchebags, but yeah, the Chads and Karens, or the bloodsuckers. Yeah, I just want to end their miserable fucking cockroach lives. So I wasn't into the whole competition, being a douchebag thing. The Russian thing, it was cute. I met a lot of interesting, creepy people. Oh, brother. I did it for like 3 years, and then I was like, well, this isn't really going anywhere. They're kind of like monarchist, post-Soviet. I called it violent Soviet yoga. Parts of it are cool. Like there's that Canadian bro who's now, kind of, getting more involved in Sistema, or exposing it, trying to expose it in a positive way. And I suppose, yeah, there are positive aspects to it. And I think a lot of people in the West, or a lot of douchebags, like to slag off on Sistema, because they don't really understand, it's not a douchebag thing. It's more of a kind of monarchist criminal intelligence sort of thing. And yeah, if you're like, swinging dick douchebag, in your face. I mean, there's certainly, I don't want to denigrate, like say the art of boxing, or, the other thing. Well, anyway, I'll get into the other issues later, but there are many aspects to like sportive, combative martial arts that are, obviously valid. I mean, these guys are, I trained BJJ in Pompano Beach like last year for a few sessions, and the trainer, he was a nice guy, professional, helpful, but he wanted serious money. The no-gi was X whatever dollars. The month of training was more money. I get it, though, kind of like dovetailing with your experience, like this dojo master, he wanted to keep out the douchebags and the crazies, and, the drifters, yeah, they get that too, I think, yeah. And, yeah, so I was like, okay, I understand, I appreciate you, allowing me in, and, instructing me, and, it's very interesting. Yeah, so, but, the other end of that is, in America especially, and there's no insurance. So, like, if I had your injury in America, I sort of had to continue my care for my leg, after Moscow in America. It was a disaster. Yeah, it was just, fascist Chinese, doctor, filthy HR Nazis. My boss was a Nazi whore at O'Hare Airport, Chicago. The what was it? The Tia Tomas who was handling my case. Oh, just absolutely awful. And I guess that's part of the course. It's not just that they hated me extra, but they hate everyone, I guess. They're just gay liberal Nazis. But healthcare in America is a fucking disaster. It's a racket, like everything else in America. And, we need a bloody revolution there. That's my dream, to take out the trash there. But at any rate, you're very limited in America. It's a very antisocial, criminal, trash kind of country, basically. So, Freikorps, pro-Nazi kind of country. And so, at any rate, so I did, then I was doing violent Soviet yoga, Sistema, for 3 years. It was nice in terms of like the yoga relaxing aspect, and like taking a punch, giving a punch, I guess. Some movement, but then I started going to like these martial arts meetups, and I was like, hey, does this really work? Well, it's marginal, right? And, those guys, again, a lot of right-wing, not as douchey, but right-wing, anti-communist assholes, many of them. And what was it like? Whatever, it's just, yeah. So, uh, a few of those guys I liked, a few of those guys I didn't like. Um, Environment wasn't as structured as it should have been. I think actually I should mention too, my pelvis got cracked or broken. It healed, but yeah, this metrosexual like yoga, kickboxing dude. Like I'm trying out, like basically Sistema, and he's doing the kickboxing. So he like front kicks me, and I keep on coming, and I'm like, wait, this isn't good. So I'm like, okay, I gotta stop. You got me good. Yeah. So, and then there's some other guy who's like Huarang Do or something. He like, head patting. He like kicks me in the head. And, I wasn't trying to be really aggressive, but he was a douchebag, just right-wing liberal schmuck. The way he was talking, against like teachers' unions, although I don't like teachers, although I worked in a high school for 7 years. But at any rate, so after that, what did I do? I looked at Defensor System. So Nate Defensor, really nice guy. I think unfortunately a lot of the Filipinos are still stuck on like the kind of tribal, chaotic, and then you get the the ones with money over here or there in the U.S. Thankfully I'm not there. There in the U.S. and it's just not good. It's like they're not so organized. They're all trying to promote themselves, but not they sort of help each other out, but it's kind of again marginal. I tried to help out my guru. I studied eskrima, a bit of salat, etc. for maybe 3 years. Not so intensely as I did like with the Russians. And what else then? So, but that was good in the sense of, it was not as physically involved. Nate, had a better sense of like not injuring people, being more, I think, professional compared to the Russians I trained with. Yeah. And what then? So, so I did that, and there was someone had mentioned to me like, there's this other Russian guy. He looked like Peter Falk, I think. Russian Jew. He claimed to be like some outlandish, like I was combatives director for like the Soviet Army, and I was like, oh really? And I was like, nah, no one would tell that big of a lie. Okay, he's probably did something like that. So I trained with him and his group for maybe a month or two, and what was it? It was just like, he was kind of off, and in the end, and then I was like, okay, let me check out Matt Powell and Promic. I was still exploring the theme of, what the hell is Sistema, or how does it relate to Sambo, and blah blah blah. Is it real? Is it violent Soviet yoga, and that's about it. So, got involved with Matt Powell, a lot of emailing back and forth, the history of Russian martial arts, or whatever you want to call it, Soviet combatives. And that got me, he suggested looking at Kelly McCann. He had trained in Krasnodar for, 2-3 years, and in the 90s, and boxing background. So, he had, a traditional kind of solid background, I guess. And then he, trained with Russians, Soviet, whatever, just not Soviet, just post-Soviet. So that was very interesting on an intellectual level. And then I even tried to train some Promic for maybe 6 months. And what else? And he was trying to establish himself, but couldn't, through Promic really. It's just, too intellectual, I think, for America and, a lot of the combatives world. And it's marginal to like even Sambo. It was one of those things that existed under the Soviet system, marginally, that, a scientist like Kadochnikov could kind of develop. I even went to, and then I even, when I was in Minsk, I even went to, one of those training sessions. I wouldn't call it Sistema, but, cousin of Sistema. And the instructor was, I guess, I don't know, was he in security or something? But very nice guy, wouldn't charge me. We did like 3 hours in this class, and it was very familiar. It wasn't too different from like Systema in America. But, I concluded, well, yeah, and I had been, did some sessions with like, what's his name? Kevin Sikor, I think, in Montreal, and Sonny Puzikas, briefly in a seminar or two. And, so, yeah, Sikor, the reason I mentioned Sikor's pointed out that a lot of the stuff is for kind of security work, or for, not just door security at a nightclub, but, national security, right? Or bodyguard, executive protection stuff, or spying, or, whatever, which is part of the family, trade, on one side of my family. So, okay, that's interesting. What? But, I'm a private individual. I'm not working for government. I'm not working, as a bouncer. I'm not doing, combatives in some cage or anything like that. Like 15 years ago, how old was I? I'm 57 now, so I was over the hill then. But, I just wanted to like study, kind of self-defense stuff, I guess. And, part of the process of, being in a class like that, the art, the meditative, therapeutic aspects as well. That's great. I think Sistema actually has a place in terms of that. And, a lot of people like to denigrate the kind of what comes out of Russia, the Soviet Union, because, they're anti-communist schmucks, or, they're basically Western, basically Nazi sympathizers, or, and then the other part of that, though, is that they're, there is a certain kind of like scientific pragmatic approach in the West, that does make sense. And, Russia in the 90s was a fucking mess. And a lot of like, hucksters and con artists and, idiots came out of, post-Soviet Russia. So yeah, it's right to be skeptical of all that, but at the same time, the schmucks in the West, well, they helped to cause all of that too. But that's, whatever. So anyway, basically then I left the Russian style, for the most part. But the interesting thing was like Dan Inosanto, one of the, old gurus of like, what was it? Eskrima, going into, what was it, Jeet Kune Do? I think with Bruce Lee, he, introduced Bruce Lee, is my understanding. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but introduced Bruce Lee to the West Coast American martial arts scene back in the day. Dan Inosanto started like training Sistema, and I think maybe with Martin Wheeler, excuse me, who people say is, fairly legit, or, that English accent, combined with his presence, lends gravitas to, violent Soviet yoga. But anyway, I left Russian martial arts after 3 years, and then I ended up going into Marshall Blades Concepts with Michael Janich, and he was basically a spook. with the U.S. Army. Basically a Polak from Cicero, what's his name? Capone's suburb of Chicago, who ended up in Southeast Asia, and then took a lot of his training with Southeast Asian bladed, empty hand, stick arts, and rationalized it and interpreted it for the USA in terms of the US legal social environment. And so I trained that system for maybe 3 years. And, I have a friend who still does trainings in that. He's an instructor in it, as well as like American Bowie and Tomahawk. And so, and then we would like mix in combatives with that, like kind of the old Fairbairn Sykes kind of school, a less crazy, less violent perhaps interpretation of, Fairbairn Sykes. More recently I was training some Sambo here in Petersburg for, I don't know, some weeks. It was interesting. I mean, I'm kind of old, and, maybe it's the effects of COVID, or I had stage 1 colon cancer like 3 years ago. No chemo, but, it's like I'm slowing down. I don't have the energy I used to. Maybe I should, work on the vitamins and the whatever else. Maybe that might help, but, I think for me, Sambo's a bit much. I'm 57, just turned 57. I was in Moscow, and I'll probably go back there. And there's one instructor who does basically Eskrima, his interpretation of Eskrima. I guess he lived in Asia for a long time, and trained all of that, and used to train military police, is just more kind of a private instructor now. And there's a class of, I don't know how many, 7 of us, and it's pretty good. I just have to not go, at least now at this time, so heavily in terms of the calisthenics and everything that wore me out. Part of it is, I need to get back into better shape. But part of it is I'm just old, and, whatever, your health catches up with you. But I like Eskrima, Kali, Salats because, you can modify it so you're not, by way of comparison, BJJ, I did that for some sessions, and I was like, wow, this is a great way to get severely injured, as you found out. And they say, well, you can be old and do it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can, but, I'm not Anthony Bourdain, and people aren't like, oh, wow, let me not injure that dude. It's quite the opposite, in a lot of cases, especially in a shithole like America, where there's a lot of aggressive right-wing bastards, and, that's the opposite of what I am. And what can I say? So, yeah, I don't want to put myself in that, position. So I think, maybe Eskrima Salat. I was looking at the newly translated book out. I forget the name of the Russian author. And then Gun Jesus's buddy worked with that Russian author to translate it. It was basically a scientific, or as near as one could get, of a scientific examination of the Fairbairn combative system. And so, I perused the book, got to the part where, they're talking about the techniques. Looking at that, I'm like, wow, that's inappropriate for, normal civilian life. Unless you're dealing with violent gutter criminals, which I was at one point in my life. I was a federal anti-corruption hire. I carried guns in Chicago, and, got threatened with death, had to threaten people with death. Got to the point where I may have had to kill someone with my hands. or injure them. But aside from scum like that, like just, and I'm not going to bars, and getting into bar fights. I don't think, yeah, when I was younger, I might have gone to a bar or a place like that, but, it's like I was never, stupid enough to, you know, uh, get involved with, the wrong crowd or idiots or jackasses like that. And so, what? I think, yeah, in the former Soviet Union, probably like Lithuania too, a lot of people, they're basically over here, they're mostly just glorified peasants. And, they don't want to socialize with people they don't know anyway. So you're less likely to run into, idiots randomly here. And the revolution here civilized the population in a way that America is not. America, it's dominated by douchebags and, basically criminals and, basically people who love Nazis. And, that's a bad place to be. I might go back to what I call Hitler Freedom Land, but, I'll just basically work out at Planet Fitness if I do, drive around in an old Chevy Suburban, shoot my rifles, on BLM land maybe, or at an established range. I'd like to see how far out I can shoot. Maybe train some martial arts combatives, whatever, with people who aren't, real fucking douchebags, or, like sketchy people, not sketchy people. Do that, but, yeah, right now, like the Karens and the Chads apparently are basically persecuting the masses and the crazies, the marginals, so I don't know, probably I'm leaning towards not going back in November, because America's a right-wing shithole, like the most right-wing shithole. Russia's not so great these days, but at least we're not, that right-wing. And antisocial, well, yeah, I like Moscow. It's a big city. You got to, out of a city of 20 million, you have to find some intelligent life there. So, so I'll just focus on the positive, I think, in Moscow. Might go back to Hitler Freedom Land and, kind of do the, hippie, Sylvester Stallone, Steven Seagal thing, driving around. But then again, lots of Chads, Karens, even fascist pigs. I might want to wait a little while to see how things shake out. If the whatever, the masses, what sort of rights the masses take for themselves in, let's say, I'll see how it shakes out, let's say, in the next year. If I'm feeling really ambitious, I might go back in November, I guess. But I'll have to see how Moscow is. I wasn't too impressed before, but the fourth glance, it's more interesting. So, I may just stay in Moscow and then go back to Hitler Freedom Land in another year, for 6 months or something, maybe. So I'll have to see. Anyway, glad you're doing okay. And yeah, maybe, who knows, if I drop into Lithuania, I've got some things I have to pick up there with a friend. Maybe, I don't know, shoot you a message. Take care.